Right, so at the end of the last episode, we just finished off tacking up the kind of lower half of the downpipe, or the second half of the downpipe, what you want to call it, the bit that runs down the back of the engine block. So that's tacked up, and I've just put a flex on there to show kind of ground clearance. I mean, it's not as high as I'd like. I mean, we can always move the flex here and gain ourselves like half an inch of ground clearance. I'm not sure until we start getting a bit further on with the flat floor. I'm not really sure what ground clearance we'll want anyway. We don't necessarily need it to be stuck right to the bottom of the subframe, but we also don't want a huge gap between flat floor and exhaust, but we need some kind of gap because obviously exhaust is hot. But that's a bridge we'll cross later. Obviously we've still got the kind of our standard Astra VXR exhaust on here at the minute, which does sit pretty high, but given that this has got no heat shields, they've all been stripped off, we can probably get it a bit higher, and we're going for some kind of cool exit at the back. Don't know exactly how that's going to work out yet. We'll get to that. We're just concentrating on the downpipe at the minute. So we've now got the top half and the lower half tacked up. We've got that bracket to think about. But before we go ahead with the bracket, I've got an idea of what we're going to do for that. It's simple enough. We'll use the kind of block to gearbox bolt mounts that mount the BCS bracket. We'll steal that. We only need one bolt fix in. It's literally just to locate this, and if we have it on one bolt fix in, it's a bit more adjustable then, because you can kind of pivot it and move it around later on if needs be. But I think what we need to do now is weld up this lower piece, weld up that top piece. There's only like 3 or 4 joints, so we'll weld them up, and then if it's going to move around at all, then when we go and make the bracket, it's already kind of in its fixed final position. So yeah, we'll get it back off the car now, throw loads more tacks on it, clean it all up, purge it out, weld it, put it back on the car, and then we can start looking at that bracket. I've got this ready to weld. Obviously we're not going to weld this joint in the middle, because that's where the flex joint's going to go. I'm just going to put some more tacks on it for now, because once you start getting quite a long downpipe, obviously that goes on the end of there, it all starts to get a bit flexible, a bit bendy, and there's quite a lot of weight there, so we want it to be accurate for when we do that bracket. So I'll just put some more tacks on here for now, beef all that up, and then I'm just going to weld these V-bram flanges and this joint here, and then I'll weld all of this up. Just so it kind of stiffens it all up for when we do the bracket. So obviously I've capped the ends off with these V-band purge caps to keep them nice and flat. They work as like a heat sink. So not only do they help us purge it, there's like a vent here, so we've got argon gas going in, pushing out all the oxygen, and then we've got a vent here for the oxygen to escape, and then the argon to escape once it's purged all the oxygen out. But these caps also work as a heat sink. So one of the tricks to welding V-bands is keeping them nice and flat. V-bands seal really well if you keep them flat when you weld them, because these interlocking types with the recess, there's like the other half of the male flange goes into that recess, and that really seals them. But with it being stainless steel, even when you kind of weld them, if you don't try and keep them flat, they will warp on you. Watching a Driftworks video a couple of weeks back, and they were having that problem with welding up V-bands, and they kind of warp. So yeah, it's always best to clamp them down to some kind of block. If you don't have like a block like that, you can make them. So We've got one here that's like just been drilled and tapped. We use cap heads, so you can just put the V-band in there. You got it at 4 points. 4 points is enough for like a 3-inch or 3.5-inch V-band. And once you kind of clamp that down, the aluminium heat sink takes loads of the heat out of it while you weld it, so it doesn't get anywhere near as hot anyway. And even if it does, the bolts are kind of holding it down flat, and then whilst it cools and comes back to room temperature, the bolts are kind of holding it in that position. So yeah, all caps as we're using there. So we've got both of these bits welded up now. Obviously been using the caps all nicely cleaned before they're welded. Got some more tacks on here. Obviously this is where our flex bellow is going to go in the middle. It's the turbo end, and that goes off to the downpipe, which will be under the car, something like that. So obviously we've purged it. That's like what we do with all of our exhaust systems and all of our exhaust parts, like downpipes and things. So that is filling the pipework with argon gas, forcing all that oxygen out, so that when we weld it, it has the same effect of having the gas come out of the welding cup, which is how we get these colours, and that's what makes it a good weld, or one of the things that makes it a good weld. But basically, filling the inside with oxygen, filling the inside with argon, is essentially doing the same as having another welding cup on the inside of the weld. Obviously when we purge it, we've got the advantage of, this is a sealed environment. We can't seal the outside environment we're in. We need oxygen to breathe, so we can't get rid of all the oxygen in the room. What they would do for like aerospace stuff is they would weld it in a tank, like an inflatable tank, and you kind of put your hands in a kind of big rubber welding gloves, and then you'd weld it inside the tank, and then that's how they get like a perfectly argon pure. Obviously we can't do that, so we have to have these big gas lenses to get good gas coverage on the outside, but we can do that on the inside. We can create that argon pure environment, so that when we weld it, the weld is just as good on the inside as on the outside, which makes it a lot stronger, a lot more resistant to heat. We haven't burnt any of the kind of any of the stainless steel out of the stainless steel. We've kept it in a really good condition as we've welded it, and that is what the gas will do. It stops the oxygen reacting with the surface as it's heated up and welded. So yeah, that's how we make a perfect weld that'll last just as long as the rest of the stainless steel does. Right, so throw it back on the car. Being super careful with it now that it's kind of welded, and I mean it's going to be on and off loads of times, so I'm not super concerned about keeping it Instagram fresh and scratch free, because it's going to get some kind of coating or covering or something on it as well. So yeah, I'm not super concerned about keeping it scratch free. It's going to be on and off many times. We've also got to put the wastegate tie into it yet as well. Right, so I've got that loose-ish. I'm just going to rotate that clamp round. So now I need to put the car up, put the other half of the downpipe on, line it all up, tighten all the clamps up so that it's fixed where we want it, then we can start on that bracket. Okay, so we've got the downpipe on at the top, downpipe on at the bottom. I'm just going to put the lift up a little bit. So now it's a case of getting all our clearances just bang on before we start working on that bracket. So we want that, we want this part of the downpipe to come out as bang on in the middle of the subframe as we can. So it's just a case of rotating it all, getting it all as close as we can get it. Square, we want it nice and square, pointing out the back. Yeah, so we can't get it bang on in the middle because the subframe actually on the Astra, the kind of tunnel part, the exhaust tunnel part of the subframe actually doesn't line up with the centre of the car because of the engine mount. It actually throws it off slightly to one side. But say it's not really a problem. We just kind of fabricate around that when we get a bit further down the exhaust. But that is pretty close. Close enough for me, or good enough for the girls I go out with, as AVE might say. Yeah, we want to keep it nice and tight to the subframe. Obviously we need like engine clearance as the engine moves, but the engine's pretty solidly mounted, so it's not going to be moving loads. So I would say that'll do us. So now it's a case of tightening up all those V-bands. We'll drop it back down again, tighten up all the V-bands, get it nice and solid, and then we can start working on that bracket. That's all tightened up now. Now it's time to start looking at that bracket. So what I think we're going to use, that, say the BCS mount, some in the same place. So those two bolts that go from the block to the gearbox, they also sandwich in that BCS mount. So we'll use that, and we're kind of obviously we're going to get rid of that and put our own bracket in there. So just going to have like a simple right angle bracket, and then a piece that comes off of the exhaust, and we'll basically just bolt them together. Might try and get like a piece in between or something adjustable. Don't know. I don't think it needs to be adjustable necessarily. This is the position we're looking at getting fixed. So I think if we make it adjustable, it might end up becoming a bit more complicated than it needs to be. Don't really want to overcomplicate it. So yeah, we'll whip those bolts out, get one of the bolts out, get a bracket in there, and then a piece to tie off it onto the exhaust, tack it on the car. Might even weld it on the car. There's enough clearance, so it will also mean we don't have to take it off the car again. We can just weld it as is, and then take it off the car, put that flex joint in, and start looking at the wastegate tie-in. So we've got that BCS bracket off. Don't need that because a load of that wiring on the back of the engine is going to get moved anyway, so we can get rid of that. And then we're going to put one of these bolts back in again. And then the lower bolt is what we'll use for the bracket. So just got something rough together. We'll bolt that to the block, and then we'll have a piece come off of this, which will bolt onto a piece that's welded on the exhaust, basically. Probably need to trim this down, obviously. We don't really need all the material that's on there. We only need it to be small, but it's easier to take material away than add it back on again. So make it a little bit bigger, we can just kind of trim it down and trim it to suit. So we've got that on there. Probably are going to need to trim it down a bit to actually bolt it up square. I hadn't anticipated that. So what we'll do is we'll take that off, we'll round it around the bolt, around where the bolt goes, and that'll give us then adjustability, and we can get it up, we'll get it bolted on square, and then we're pretty much going to weld a piece coming straight off the exhaust, and then we'll have like a link piece between the two, and it's just going to support this and just give it, you know, some kind of location for then the rest of the exhaust to hang off of. So we've got this bolted in now, rounded off, so it's a kind of a bit adjustable. I'm going to put a hole in here and basically just weld a nut on the back. That gives us like a captive bracket then. Then it's basically a case of welding a piece to the exhaust with a hole in it, and then we'll just have a link piece between the two. So like a little dog-legged piece in between the two. So it goes in between here, and then another bracket that will be welded on the exhaust here. So next job is to cut a piece to go on the exhaust and get that tacked on. Made some more pieces. So this is going to be the bracket that welds to the exhaust. Obviously we could just like bang it on and weld it. The only problem is you then weld in like quite a thick bracket to like a thin wall tube. Obviously we'll purge it when we weld it. I mean, there's loads of ways of doing this, but that's probably not the best way. A better way is actually to double up the wall thickness of the tube, or treble it really. This is a 3mm piece that I've radiused to match roughly match the diameter of the 3-inch tube. So we'll weld that to the tube, and then we'll weld the bracket to that. That way we'll kind of fillet weld in the 2 3mm pieces together, so we can get like a really strong weld. And then we've got all of this surface area to actually weld onto the exhaust, or nicely purged weld. It'll be like, you know, pretty strong really. Again, there's loads of ways of doing that, but that's just, you know, the quick, easy way I came up with for this example. So yeah, we now need to, I'm going to tack that on there. I'm actually going to make the piece that goes in between first. So that'll be on there, something like that. Before I go ahead and tack all this on, I'll drill that hole in there, in this piece, and then I'll make the piece up that goes between here and here, and then I can basically just bolt it all together with it all on the car, and then actually tack it all up and probably weld it on, or weld at least some of it, get some pretty decent tacks on there, take it off the car, purge it, and then weld it. And that way we're going to get it, you know, super accurate, and I won't have to like get up there and try and hold it and tack it all at the same time. The kind of bracketry will hold it all for me. Right, so we've got our pieces for the downpipe. The block fit in, which I've welded up now, put the captive nut on the back of, so we can refit that. And I've got this piece to go in the middle. Obviously this end's still not finished. We're going to get another hole in here, but we'll get it on the car, and then we can know exactly where to put that hole basically. So put that in there. Not enough hands. So we're going to need a bit of a bend in there before we can even think about drilling a hole in it. So probably put a bend in basically about halfway, about 30-degree bend maybe, something like that. So we'll do that to start with, and then throw it back on and see what it looks like. We need to get it pointing towards the downpipe basically. At the minute it's obviously kind of like scooting straight past, so we need to get that bracket bent to a point where it's pointing at the downpipe. So to bend this, we don't have any bending equipment that will bend 3mm stainless flat like this easily. So a really good way you can do it at home if you don't have the equipment, like we haven't got, is to basically just slit it with a disc cutter. You basically open that up. It allows you to bend it a lot easier, so like slit it down to like maybe halfway or just past, and then once you've slit it, you can bend it to the angle you need and then just weld it up. That's what we've done here. So that now is basically the right angle, it's pointing towards the downpipe. So what I'll do is, because it's basically the right angle, I'll weld that up, then we'll put it back up against the car, get the other parts tacked onto the downpipe, then get a hole in here, and that's it, we'll be done. So we've got that bolted up there now, welded up at the correct angle. So we've just got these final two pieces. What I'm going to do to make it, again, really easy for myself, is I'm going to put this up roughly where it wants to be. I'm going to space it back from the downpipe 3mm, and then I'm going to draw to put my hole in, like roughly where the hole wants to go. Oops, dropped a bit. So I know my hole wants to roughly go there. So then I'm going to drill that hole, nut and bolt this on. I'll probably have to trim it down, but that way I can trim it down to get it to fit bang on, and then just weld it on, tack it on the car. I know it's going to be perfect. So we've now got the bracket bolted up in the correct location, bent at the right angle. We've got it all kind of hovering there, kind of using the bolts to kind of put tension on it to get it in the correct position. So I'm now basically just going to tack on that plate onto the downpipe, and then tack the little bracket piece onto that plate. Okay, so we've got the bracket tacked onto the downpipe now, and that's kind of as far as we can go before we need to start looking at the wastegate tie-in. So that's going to be the next kind of tricky job. We've also got to put that bellow back in there at the top as well. So we'll save that for the next episode. Thanks very much for watching. If you liked what we were doing, give us a thumbs up. If there's anything you think you can suggest, any cool crazy ideas, put it in the comments. We're open to pretty much anything on this car. So yeah, let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.